which is ironically in the East Riding of Yorkshire. And the River Don is in front of you there, just before its confluence with the River Ouse, which then flows into the Humber and on into the North Sea. I say ironically because the Don flows pretty much exclusively through South Yorkshire, although some of its tributaries flow also through the northern part of Derbyshire. So yeah, this is the first in the series of these videos. We're starting ironically at the end, because this is the end of the river. As I say, you can look downstream that way. We're heading towards the River Ouse and on into the Humber. Upstream that way, back towards Doncaster and Sheffield and the industrial towns up that way. So, just flip this around. So, introduce you to my dad, Don Catchment Rivers Trust trustee. What can you tell us about the river here, Dad?
Well, the most interesting thing is that this isn't the true course of the River Don.
Yeah.
The River Don is almost unique in that it's, over the centuries, it's flowed into 3 different river systems.
Yeah.
Its parent river is actually the River Trent. The River Don turned off at Thorn, went across the Hatfield Chase and exited into the River Trent just before Trent Falls, where the Trent joins the Ouse. But work was carried out in the 17th century to try and capture what was perceived to be excellent turf, potentially excellent farming land. A man called Cornelius Vermeulen, who I've no doubt we'll be talking about later on in this series, was responsible for that work. Vermeulen wanted to try to channel the water, which had traditionally gone down to the River Trent, across land, and utilising a channel which is believed to have been cut by the Romans to exit actually into the River Aire. The plan was found to be faulty in the sense that the land to the north of the river, which traditionally had always been dry and was excellent farmland, started to flood.
Right.
And the owners of the land took issue with Vermeulen and forced him to try and improve the situation such that their land stayed dry. The idea of transferring the water into the Aire fell foul because a big flood occurred and it washed out the sluice which channeled the water down towards Airmin. Vermeulen had absolutely no alternative but to cut a new channel, and Vermeulen dug a channel, which you can see here, to take the water down into the River Ouse.
Yeah.
So in effect, the flow had gone into the Trent and into the Aire, and now into the River Ouse.
So you're saying this river shouldn't really be here?
No,
This is totally unnatural.
This is a straight
channel.
A straight channel, a flood alleviation channel.
Yeah.
In effect.
Yeah.
And
is that why they call it the Dutch River?
it's called the Dutch River because Vermeulen was a Dutchman.
So at the Don Catchment Rivers Trust, presumably we're quite indignant about the fact that our river changes its name just before it ends.
Indignant in the sense that it would have been nice to have retained the status quo, because the area that Vermeulen drained was probably one of the most abundant, ecologically abundant areas of land in the east of England.
Right. So there's a lot to be gained from doing what he did all those centuries ago. Yeah.
What Vermeulen did, in a sense, is destroy a piece of pristine habitat,
Yeah.
which had supported generations of people who cut reeds, fished, wildfowled.
So what he did was try to tame nature, yeah,
Yes,
for the benefit of man.
basically.
Yeah, which is
that's
a
what
common theme that we're going to touch upon throughout this series of videos, because the impact of man on the River Don over centuries is massive, isn't it? And this is just,
it is.
this is a sort of final indignity in a way, isn't it, of the
Yes,
river.
I mean, whatever work's carried out now to try and improve the physical state of the River Don
Yeah,
will not involve this channel.
yeah,
This is now permanent.
Yeah.
It will remain here.
yeah,
The work that we can carry out is well upstream of here.
yeah. Am I right in saying that's because there really isn't anything we could do about this?
Well, I mean,
even if we wanted to.
to try and, for instance, meander this
Yeah,
channel
yeah,
would cost probably into billions of pounds now.
yeah, and
because
the surrounding industry would probably be a little
You would have
upset.
you have to destroy a lot of that,
Yeah.
that infrastructure.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so the river here, I mean, it looks pretty much just like hot chocolate. It's turbid is the scientific word for it, which basically just means it's full of sediment. Is that right? So why is that? Why is it so brown and muddy
The
looking?
river here is tidal.
Right.
So what happens is all the sediment that's carried down the river on an up tide, that's
Yeah.
a rising tide, allows that sediment to settle out.
Yeah.
And as it settles out, it lays on the bottom.
Yeah.
As soon as the river reverts to outflowing, as the tide drops, the energy that's generated by the flow of water going down
Yeah.
picks up that sediment again and stirs it up.
And that's what we're seeing.
And
that
that's what you
sediment.
see here.
Yeah. Yeah.
It shouldn't be perceived to be polluted. It's
Yeah.
not polluted.
Yeah. Yeah.
There are fish here.
Okay.
Um,
We'll come to that in a minute. So these big flood banks, well, it is actually in flood banks, but these big banks of mud that we can see next to the river here, that's the same thing, yeah? That's the mud deposited, the sediment deposited as the river slows down and subject to tides and such like. So we're here, we're 50 miles from the sea, and we've still got a tidal influence.
very much so, yes.
Because the Humber is well known for its big tides. That's correct,
Yes,
isn't it?
that's right.
Yeah.
And the tidal limit, if you look at Ordnance Survey, is actually just below Doncaster town centre.
Right, which is 20 miles from here, something
Good
like
20
that.
miles.
Yeah. So the tide actually goes all that way up. That's not to say that salt water or saline water gets here, is it? I think the saline limit is a bit downstream in the River Ouse and Boothbury.
Boothbury Bridge is slightly above this point.
Yeah. On the
But
Ouse.
but salinity is saline conditions can occur here
Right.
on really high spring tides.
Yeah.
The saline water will intrude
Yeah.
probably for another 2 or 3 miles at least.
And of course that is significant in terms of ecology, because saline water, or brackish water as it's probably better described, because it's part saline, it's not like seawater, is only certain organisms, only certain ecology can survive in those conditions. Yeah.
That's correct. Yeah.
So tell us a little bit more about the fish then, because we know that is your ultimate
Objective.
interest. And you've been dying to get onto that, I know. Yeah.
I mean, the most interesting part about this particular channel is the River Don used to be, without question, one of the most productive salmon fisheries in Britain. If we look at market records in Doncaster of sales of salmon back in the 17th, 16th, 15th century, you will see that there were huge numbers of these fish on sale, and they were commanding literally pennies, literally being given away. That's a demonstration of how prolific they were. The general population, the poorer people, would not have been able to afford things like eels. They would have been the people who ate salmon.
Yeah.
The gentry would not have even considered eating salmon. It was believed to be below them. Now, all of those fish had to migrate up the River Ouse and the River Trent, and they then made their way upstream to Doncaster. When Vermeulen blocked the entry into the River Trent, in effect what he did was block the migration route of salmon.
Right.
You could have expected there to be a significant drop in the number of salmon,
Yeah.
because in effect they had to find another route to get up the river of their birth. The reality is, surprisingly, it had little effect. If you look at market records, there's no evidence of a dip, of a reduction in the availability of salmon. So the fish had actually found their way to the Don up the River Ouse instead of the River Trent, which is quite surprising. Given the same situation now, I personally would have suspected that there would be a significant damage to the overall population. But market records and other evidence points that.
But then, of course, they disappeared due to pollution.
That's right. Yeah.
Decades, and are now coming back. So, salmon come via this route now.
That's right. And every salmon that gets up the River Don has to come up here.
Yeah.
And it's swum through all this turbidity.
Chocolate-coloured river.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, what the fish we got in there?
Well, you've got all sorts of fish, like depends whether you're talking here or whether you're talking further up. At this point, the fish population will consist primarily of things like flounder, which are a saltwater fish, but which can tolerate
A certain level of
certain amount of fresh water.
brackish water.
Yeah. Traditionally, there would have been huge numbers of smelt and other species, and they used to come up in huge numbers and were netted down here. As a result of all the pollution that was generated by industry upstream, those populations were annihilated.
Yeah.
One of the most interesting fish species that would have come up this river are sturgeon.
Sturgeon.
Sturgeon were not an infrequent visitor to the river. In fact, if you go to Doncaster Museum, they actually have probably the last one that was caught, and as I understand it, it was caught by someone using a hay fork and stabbing the fish and dragging it out. Now, those fish clearly couldn't get past Doncaster.
Yeah.
Because there was a big weir at Doncaster at that time.
Yeah.
So they could only get as far as that. There's no evidence whatsoever that they bred in the river, but a species that did breed in the river was burbot. Now burbot are of the cod family.
Yeah.
And burbot used to come into this river in very significant numbers, or frequent this river in very significant numbers, particularly further upstream, where you had those tidal conditions, but the salinity was very rare.
Yeah.
But burbot now are an extinct species.
Yeah.
But they've only disappeared really in the last 70 to 80 years.
Yeah.
My uncle used to fish for burbot in the 1940s and 1950s and would often catch up to a dozen because they were excellent eating.
Wow.
But activities such as land drainage, pollution, pollution, etc., eventually wiped out their population.
So the changing nature of the fish populations in this river reflect to a large extent human activity, what man has done to the river,
much so.
Both in terms of pollution, physically modifying the river, changing its entire course, as we heard earlier on. But now we're back into a position where, because of a lot of work, hard work done by a lot of people to improve the water quality in the river and to remove physical obstructions, we'll get onto that on future episodes in more detail, but we have got salmon swimming up this river again into Sheffield, and hopefully we'll get the evidence that we believe, what we believe to be happening already, which is that they are starting to breed again in the river.
I think what you mentioned about physical damage, the River Don became polluted from about 1850 onwards, and remained polluted really until the mid 1980s. It's still not pristine in terms of its water quality, but it's sufficiently improved to allow salmon to survive.
Right.
But the problem was, once the river became polluted, no consideration was given to its physical nature, and straightening of the channel, building weirs, all sorts of activities had a massive effect on this river. And as well as being probably the most polluted river in Europe, it became probably one of the most physically damaged rivers. And that's where the Rivers Trust step in. We are trying to address all those physical pieces of physical damage.
We're trying to, within the bounds of what is achievable, return it as closely as possible to its natural state, aren't we?
That's right.
And the more we do that, the better able, or the more successful we are at doing that, the more the ecology will return to its natural state, and everybody will benefit, really.
I mean, when you get fish populations build up in a river, you get increase in numbers of piscivorous birds, grebes, herons, etc.
So these mud banks here will be full of invertebrates, won't they? That are fed upon by fish, birds, and other species. So there's a whole ecology that goes beyond the fish that we've already talked about.
I mean, now that the water quality has improved to the extent it has, that food chain can re-establish itself. And you're right. I mean, the invertebrates that establish themselves in the banks and so on.
There used to be another problem, didn't there, in terms of salmon coming up here, which was a water quality barrier. There used to be a big dissolved oxygen sag in the River Ouse, not far from here, didn't there? Which effectively, because salmon are well known for requiring very oxygenated water, they're very intolerant of pollution, and they came across this barrier that was the result of industrial discharges into the river, I think mainly in Selby area, didn't they? I think a lot of that's been resolved now, isn't it?
I mean, the Ouse system now, which is includes the Nid, the Ure, the Swale, all of these rivers now have salmon populations, which had traditionally been destroyed.
Excellent. Right. Well. So this is the end of the journey of the River Don. 70 miles it is to the top of the river. That's the main river. All sorts of tributaries come into the river in between there and here. It flows through Sheffield, Rotherham, Doncaster. Its main tributary, the Rother, flows through Chesterfield. Its other main tributary, the Dearne, flows through Barnsley. So humans are intertwined with the river, in not just by living near it, but in so many ways, and that's what makes this river so fascinating. The river is sort of has a life of its own, but it's so influenced by the lives of the humans that live around it, and that's the story we're going to tell in these videos. So this is just the start, so watch out for the next one. Thanks very much.